There we go. So good morning. And I know that these few weeks, maybe you took the fire class in a mode of preparedness that then suddenly became more urgent. And I hope that our first class gave you some tools. And if anyone lost their house or a piece of their life in these last big fires, please reach out to us. We would love to support you. And it's been a wild ride for me. I just moved my apothecary back home today, and I know Samwise had to move, and so we're coming at this from this educator place as well as a personal place, like last class, but maybe a little bit different this time. And to speak to the some of what is behind the process of land acknowledgement that Samwise offered, we have burned 1 million acres of California this year, and one piece of information that I found really heartbreaking is that about 6 million acres were burned yearly as a part of native land tending practices. And so I have this sense, because the fires have burned so rarely, that they're burning hotter and causing more damage. And so 1 million acres of like catastrophic fire feels like so much. And in comparison to fires that really tend the landscape, it's actually so little. And so there's a lot of grief for me there today, and like sitting with those numbers and realizing how much we have to do to be stewards of this landscape and to be in service to Indigenous communities here, and really build right relationship with the element of fire in California. So that's a little bit about where I'm coming from. And I think I'll just leave it to Stasha. So Stasha, do you want to take it away?
Okay, hi everybody. I am having some internet problems, as is the way of our times. So if I start to glitch out, just say something in the chat and I'll pause what I'm saying. And I'm just gonna do a quick recap of what we talked about last class. We talked about herbs to regulate the emotional system. We talked about what our body is trying to tell us in regard to panic. We covered some herbal preparations. And we talked about evacuating and considerations around that, and then how to filter the air and like ways to utilize sort of like lifestyle techniques to help mitigate the effects of smoke. The recording is available, and so we will have that. And then Madeline, do you mind putting up the slides and showing the preparations briefly? And then next I'm going to just go over now briefly what we're going to talk about in this class. So we're going to start by talking about what wildfire smoke is comprised of, and then we're going to talk about the systems affected, so and sort of go into the kind of theory about that a little bit, and then talk about some supplements and nutritions, and we'll kind of break it up by body system, and then go into some specific herbs sort of that fit vaguely into each section, although I think it's important to remember that herbs do many things, and we're just touching on really why they come to mind for wildfire smoke. So right, so any questions about that before we start? You can put them in the chat. Maybe Sam will. But I'm just gonna keep talking, I suppose. Okay, so next, so we're gonna talk really quickly about the chemical makeup of smoke. Do you mind switching the slide? Thank you. So I did some research about what wildfire smoke is comprised of, and really the only things that I could find were done with studies on firefighters, so wildland firefighters, and these are the accumulative effects, right? So there's been very few studies about what smoke does to us over time. There are a couple for wildland firefighters. This one was written in 2008 and then redone in 2018. I found it at Wildfire Today magazine. And then I also, one of the resources is Baseline Measurements of Smoke Exposure Among Wildland Firefighters, which was written also in 2008. So I just want to be really transparent that there's a fair bit of extrapolation that I'm doing. So these are people who are really close to smoke, multiple days a week for a long period of time. So, and year after year. So we're starting to get a taste of that, but it's not quite the same. So I just want to make that really transparent. So I'm going to go through them briefly, but also we will kind of talk about why it's relevant as we go on. So the thing that we hear most about is particulate matter. And so the size of the particulate matter is the main determinant of where in the respiratory tract the particle will come to rest when inhaled. When we talk about the respiratory system, that's going to be way more transparent. So that's what that PM number is. The smaller the particulate matter, the deeper into the recesses of the lungs we fear the particles will reside. What we don't want is for them to permeate the gas exchange regions of the lungs, which we'll talk about that. That's like the deepest ends of the airways where cellular respiration takes place. So that's particulate matter. And then there's aldehydes, which are volatile organic compounds. And volatile just means that they diffuse, essentially. They can cause immediate irritation of the eyes, nose, and throat. And inhalation can cause inflammation of the lungs. So the short-term effects of this include cough, shortness of breath, and chest pain. The most abundant aldehyde in smoke is formaldehyde. And these have kind of cascade processes. So like, for example, when formaldehyde enters the body, it's converted to formic acid, which is also toxic to the body. So this is all to say that your liver is going to be doing a lot of work, which Madeline will talk about soon. I'm going to kind of just go through some of these with less detail. So next is sulfur dioxide, which just causes severe irritation of the eyes and mucous membranes, and it can cause bronchoconstriction, which is that tightening of the lung that you can sort of feel. It can cause spasms. Carbon monoxide, acrolein, which is just present in animal fats and vegetable oils, and it can just increase the risk of respiratory infections. And let's see, benzene is an industrial chemical. So this is what's found. It's used to make plastics, resins, synthetic fibers, rubber lubricants, dyes, detergents, drugs, and pesticides, which is all to say that, you know, when structures burn, there's a lot of chemicals that are being released into the air and that we have to filter. Um, then crystalline silica is one that I feel particularly concerned about. So it's considered a carcinogen, and it is being found in the smoke. Okay. So that's like a long list. That's like a little bit boring, so I apologize. But I wanted to just talk about like the kinds of things that we are being exposed to, or that people are being exposed to through proximity with wildfire smoke and structures burning. Are there any questions about that that I may or may not be able to answer? I'll wait one sec. Petal?
Yeah, hi, thanks. Just kind of related, and maybe you don't have the answer. I was wondering, is it okay to like eat organic food or vegetables that are grown outside that are exposed to the smoke for long periods of time? I didn't get a straight answer from the person I asked. They said like, no, it's just trees burning. It's not harmful, but I don't know if you have that knowledge.
I don't, that's a really good question that I don't have the exact answer for. Madeline may, but my understanding is it resides on top, and so rinsing it is okay, and that the residual effects would be in the soil, so the soil would need to be tested. That's the answer that's from the top of my head, but it's not a well-informed farming answer. Madeline, did you have?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and one that there was grant money put towards investigating after the 2017 fires for agricultural projects in Sonoma County, because there was so much ash was pretty pervasive here. So what was found was basically that washing is an acceptable solution. And actually there was like very surprisingly little found in the soil for the most part in terms of like lasting effects from ash falling. They did end up discovering that chickens had been bioaccumulating I think it was arsenic, and that ended up being like something totally separate from the fires that they only found out because of the study. So yeah, the long story short, Petal, is that washing your vegetables right now is sufficient, and soil testing, if you're in an area where burning structures happened, is really important and required, and a good practice to do every few years in agriculture anyway, but not something that you need to worry about in a significant way. Back to you, Stasha.
Okay. Thank you for answering that. That's really helpful. So I bring up the chemicals just to really illustrate the effect on all body systems. So as herbalists, we try to see things holistically. And so all body systems are interrelated, and so they are all affected. Of course, we've picked the ones that feel like the easiest to explain in an hour and a half, or sort of touch on. So we're going to talk about the liver, the respiratory system, cardiovascular, and nervous system very briefly. So just know that it's kind of a it's the best we can do in an hour and a half. And really quickly, before we start talking about the body systems, we're just going to talk about supplements and nutrition. So the first thing is bioflavonoids, and bioflavonoids are the deeply hued berries. They're present in deeply hued berries and in like dark leafy greens, and they're antioxidants. And they inhibit histamine release from mast cells, so they can help calm the cascade of allergies that may occur when we're breathing in chemicals. So, and then Madeline is going to talk about a few other things.
Yeah, so a couple other things I think, just to sort of zoom out to even beyond supplements, is that there's so much outside of herbal medicine and supplements and things that we're putting inside of our bodies that are care practices. And so just a good question is to think about what are practices that support you when you're feeling the feelings that are coming up for you right now, and what has historically been helpful. And where do you go when you're feeling the feelings that you're feeling? And to speak more to these supplements, well, the food part is tricky because on the one hand, we're having a really stressful situation, and on the other hand, it is more taxing to our body than usual. So there's a harm reduction game that we're playing here of like, is sugar binging going to make me feel better in the short term, even if it is maybe like not serving my body quite so much? Or like so many different iterations of that question. But a big thing is increasing our water intake. And this is a huge one in terms of supporting our processes of detoxification, in terms of supporting our emotional well-being. Being dehydrated and being anxious can really go hand in hand. Just even in daily life outside of kind of disaster world that we now live in. And also oxygenation. So being dehydrated, lower blood volume means that we're not going to be able to bring oxygen to cells as efficiently. It also means we're not going to be able to bring carbon dioxide away from cells as efficiently. And so that has cognitive effect in and of itself. And so how do we drink more water? I think a lot of people struggle with drinking enough water. It's recommended to drink half of your weight in ounces. So 150-pound person would be drinking 75 ounces a day, which is more than a half a gallon of water. And that's not what most people are drinking. And so to kind of challenge that 8 glasses a day paradigm, it is unique. And that's not like a hard and fast rule. Some people are going to need more water than others. And some of that has to do with your ancestry and how your ancestors processed water and how much water was available in the environment where your ancestors are from. But practices that really help me include drinking a quart of water when I first get up can be really helpful. And then you don't have as much water to drink throughout the rest of the day. Also, it can be helpful to put a little bit of gray salt or lemon in your water to kind of help you absorb hydration. And another practice that I'll do is I'll take a water walk, which isn't as accessible during smoky times. But if you are in a moment where the air is clear enough that you can go take a walk, or you have the kind of filtration where you can do that safely, filling up a quart of water and taking a walk around your neighborhood with like the rule for yourself that you're going to take a stroll and you're not going to come home until you finish that quart of water can be a good way to give yourself a break in the middle of your workday. It can be a good way to connect with place and also just get that hydration in. So that is a trick that has supported me and my clients. And I also think just thinking about what are habits that you do and trying to find ways to tag hydration on to habits that you already have can be really helpful. So that's water intake. And then also omega-3s. Omega-3s are inflammation support. So by lowering cytokines and other inflammatory compounds, we're reducing inflammation for the whole body. And so that impacts us on multiple levels. It impacts our digestion, our connective tissue. People take omega-3s for all sorts of reasons. But the cardiovascular, respiratory, and mental health effects of anti-inflammatory action are a big part of what we're going for in fire season. And where do you get omega-3s? Verdolaga or purslane is the best plant source. It's the plant with the highest amount of omega-3s. Also, little fishes, nuts and seeds, like you can take a fish oil or a flax oil. A good fire season tip for getting some omega-3s in would be taking that water that you're trying to drink and putting chia seeds in it, getting that hydration omega 1-2 punch. And then antioxidants, really protective, scavenge free radicals. The smoke in itself is causing your body to produce more free radicals, and so increasing your antioxidant intake helps with that. And then also honey. Honey is a good tool in our herbal toolkit as something that is moistening, and in addition to being antimicrobial and wound healing. But sometimes a spoonful of sugar really does help the medicine go down, and it can kind of remedy some constitutional imbalances that you might be having with certain herbs. So like I really love a fresh elecampane honey, and I find it to be much less heating than other kinds of elecampane preparations might be. Stasha?
Yeah, I think I was just gonna reiterate what you said, which is just that if you're gonna be using dry herbs in formulation, or herbs that are herbs that can be drying to mucous membranes, you can mitigate some of the effects of that by extracting the herbs into honey, or just adding honey, which allows more moist, it imparts more moisture to the herb, if that makes sense, or protects you from some of the aromatics, I guess would be one way to think of it. And then next we're going to talk about the liver. So we went through all of those chemicals, and it just means that, you know, your liver is doing a lot of work. And something I always say when I'm teaching about the liver, which is kind of a corny dad joke, but is accurate, it's just that they don't call it a liver for nothing. Like, it's very important to our vital function. So Madeline's going to talk about that a bit.
Yeah, so there are over 350 functions of the liver, and the liver is, well, it's on the right side of our belly. And so, here, I will demo. My liver is kind of like right here, and it has 5 lobes, and it is super important, like Stasha said. So it's processing compounds at all times. It's processing endogenous and exogenous compounds. So both things that our body produces and things that we're trying to break down from the environment. Our hormones are processed in our liver. That's why sometimes people with PMS will get a lot of support from just liver support and not even touching the hormonal piece. It supports us in digestion. It supports us in the metabolization of drugs. So one of the reasons that there are so many contraindications with some herbs that push our liver is because it affects drug metabolism. So gentle liver support during these times, because we have increased toxin load and our liver is taxed with the responsibility of helping break those down and get them out of our body, is really important. And also, especially if we're in heavy smoke, not only gentle liver support, but hepatoprotectives. So hepatoprotectives are herbs that protect our liver. So hepatitis, right? Inflammation of our liver. So that HEPA part is liver. So hepatoprotectives, hepatics is like a larger category of herbs that work on our liver. And oh my God, I just had a total brain fart. Excuse me. So your whole body is really put at ease by supporting your liver function, your digestion, your mental clarity, and diet can be an important piece here. And so a little bit about the harm reduction I was talking about earlier, like how you can give your liver a little bit more support right now by maybe not eating as many super fatty foods as you're used to, or drinking as much alcohol, doing as many drugs, etc. Gives your liver a break. And I know that those things can all be coping mechanisms, and that there's a give and take. So sometimes the liver has to give a little extra. And still, I think it's important to recognize that no matter what, our livers have a finite capacity. And so just acknowledging that so that we can be choiceful about the decisions that we make that have impact on our liver that's doing a little bit extra work for us right now in processing out any toxins that are in the smoke. Stasha's gonna talk about milk thistle, a favorite of our liver herbs. You're muted.
Do you mind putting up the MatMed slide? Thank you. So I'm just going to start talking while Madeline pulls that up. So milk thistle is Silybum marianum, and it's pretty famous for protecting our livers from chemical damage. There's been a lot of studies done on it in Germany on humans who have had amanita poisoning. They do a intravenous injection of Silybum, and it can prevent people's livers from, essentially your livers implode when you have amanita poisoning. So it's a pretty powerful liver herb, and it stimulates liver protein synthesis. And so basically that means that it has an antioxidant action, more marked than vitamin E. And let's see, what do I want to say about it? You could spend in a full hour talking about milk thistle. It's a really well-studied herb. So we're just going through kind of the ways that we see it be helpful at this time. But it's important to have both a water extract or an aqueous extract, and also the alcohol part. So I like to do it as a fluid extract, which just means that it has a wash of alcohol and a wash of water, and then it is reduced and combined. Or you can chew it. You can grind it and kind of gamasio it into your food. I would say that it tastes fine, but not great. So whatever works well for you. Capsules are fine, but you need to make sure that the seeds are broken open so that you can process them. Otherwise, they will go right through your body. And let's see, it's contraindicated with a lot of prescription drugs. It can help your body, it can speed up synthesis of and drug metabolism, like Madeline was talking about. So it would be important to just ask or alert your herbalist, or at least do some research about whether or not it will interact with the specific medication that you're taking. Okay, so we're going to move on. Next is reishi, and we don't have a slide for that, but reishi is Ganoderma lucidum, and I think Samwise can type that in. We use red reishi, is the one we're talking about right now. So reishi is good for, again, I want to say that a lot of these herbs are useful for many, many things, and we are kind of just talking about it. We're just talking about it, some of the things that come up for us around wildfire smoke. So this would be a good, we sort of talked about in the beginning of last class, kind of like the wildfire COVID balance that we have to do. So this would be one to think of that would be helpful for both. And you want to take, so it's a lung tonic, a liver tonic, and a cardiovascular tonic. So as we go through those body systems, you'll see how this touches on each one. It's anti-inflammatory to these systems, and in specific, it has a great effect on asthma. And it can help with stress, so it's also has an affinity with the nervous system. You should be cautious with it, with blood thinning medications. Was there anything you wanted to add, Madeline, on reishi?
Yeah, I really love it for building up deep immunity. I also think one of the reasons it feels most appropriate for me right now is that in addition to giving you a little bit of gentle liver support, strengthening your respiratory system, it has this heart supportive grounding energy to it that can feel so stabilizing in a little bit of the turmoil and insecurity that we're facing. And so yeah, that nervous system effect that Stasha spoke to, I just kind of want to underscore the way in which it can be really stabilizing. Yeah.
And then the last herb we'll touch on in this liver section is Schizandra, Schizandra sinensis, and it's a liver herb and also a specific for the lungs. It holds moisture in the body. It can protect the liver from chemical damage. It is considered an adaptogen, so it has wide applications, as is reishi. It also helps with alertness and can alleviate anxiety. It's contraindicated with some prescription medications, so that's also important to check. It can affect the metabolism. And then also it fills caffeine receptor sites, so it can potentiate caffeine, which is, if you're taking it for anxiety, I've seen it be not great, in that if you also drink a lot of coffee or other forms of caffeine, it can potentiate the caffeine. So, and again, I feel like I have to say this for every herb. There's just really, we could talk about them all each for an hour. So we're just touching on it. Okay, so next we're going to talk about lungs. There will be a couple of slides, but first I'm just going to sort of talk about the review of respiratory anatomy. So one thing, so we take in air through our mouth and our nose, and so that affects our nasopharynx passageway. So there's the upper respiratory system, so that's the primary way for air to enter. It's a filter, and it regulates temperature and humidity of the air to make it easier on the lungs. And then the lower respiratory tract kind of look like upside down trees. And so it starts here, they break down, they bifurcate going into each lung, and then they further bifurcate or break off into branching, like they terminate in alveoli, which is the end of the sort of, one way you could think about it is like the leaves of the bronchial tree. The respiratory membranes of an adult human, if spread out, have the surface area of a tennis court. So this surface area is so tightly coiled and, how do I say this? Like, it's folded so much, and you need the surface area because of gas exchange. So the larger the surface area you have available, the more opportunity your body has to oxygenate its blood. So the primary reason why we breathe is for gas exchange. So that's also called cellular respiration. And I'm just gonna, you can read the spiel, but glucose is burned in the presence of oxygen to create adenosine triphosphate, which is ATP, water, and carbon dioxide. So the process creates energy, and then, it's pumped around the body, and then we breathe out carbon dioxide. So this happens every time we breathe. If we have particulate matter, or if we have otherwise inflamed alveoli, we have less opportunity for oxygenating our blood, which can lead to a lot of uncomfortable sensations. We all, have probably had anxiety where it feels like we're unable to get enough oxygen. We've coughed, we've had flus. We know what it feels like to have our lungs covered with mucus and the surface area reduced. So I just wanted to show this as sort of to help illustrate why it's important, why lung herbs are important at this time. Although going outside, you can kind of just see why, why it affects us. We can feel it in our lungs. So why is it important to talk about oxygen exchange? Simply put, all metabolic processes are slowed down when there is less oxygen available. And we're going to talk about that more in the next section of cardiovascular. I did some further extrapolation and looked at some studies on hypoxia, which is essentially not getting enough oxygen, or where there's reduced blood flow to the brain. So we'll talk about that momentarily. So this is a really rough A&P review. A&P means anatomy and physiology, so I apologize, but I do feel like it's important to give some background to why we choose these herbs and what's happening in your body. So the first herb that comes to mind for wildfire smoke for me, and I don't want to speak for Madeline, but I assume for Madeline, is mullein, which is Verbascum thapsus. And it's really best as a tea, to be honest. It works as a tincture. You can use it as a tincture, but really it shines as a tea. This says 1 to 2 teaspoons per cup of water. And I would say that should be increased during smoke time. So you could do like 2 to 4 teaspoons in a cup of water, and then more teacups throughout the day. It works pretty well as a fluid extract. As well, which we described with the milk thistle. So the thing that I really want to say about it is that the saponins in mullein act as a detergent, which helps the cilia on our lungs. So I didn't get to this in the anatomy, but the cilia are the hair-like structures that cover the surface of the alveoli that help. They utilize a wave-like motion to bring mucus and debris up out of the lungs. And so sometimes when we have a lot of stuck mucus, the cilia are trying to move, which gives us that feeling of constriction, or it can feel kind of painful as mucus moves itself out of the lungs. It can feel like a sharp pain, or we can cough a lot. So mullein is helpful in that regard. The saponins draw fluid from the tissue and create a thinner mucus that's easier to expectorate or cough up. And let's see, you want to use the first or second ear leaves, and you definitely want to strain it through a cloth or through some kind of fine strainer. The hairs on the mullein leaf can be irritating to our throats, which can cause a cough mechanism. So you can kind of undo your progress with that sometimes. And then the other thing is that mullein is it seems to allay the anxiety associated with asthma or with the inability to breathe. So if you're feeling a lot of anxiety around your lungs, mullein helps as sort of as a nervine in that way. I'm not using that term right, but it helps alleviate anxiety. And you can use it in both dry horse coughs or wet productive coughs. So that is another thing to consider. Madeline, do you want to add some stuff to that?
Yeah, sure. I am definitely of the mullein as a primary smoke herb camp, and I guess to just say I think we talked about it a little bit last time, but Stasha and I dose differently. So the doses on the slides are going to be Stasha's, and I'll pipe in with some of mine too. But in general, I'm kind of more of a lower dose herbalist, and so I'm going to be dosing the tea pretty equivalently, or probably I would say instead of teaspoons there, I would be tablespoons. So I'm higher up there on the tea. But I would probably be dosing 10 to 15, maybe 20 drops of tincture. I really like mullein tincture. I think I prefer the tea, like Stasha said, but if I'm going to go with tincture, I'll go with cooked tincture. So it's almost like a preserved tea. And I think it's important talking about the tea too, to talk about mullein is a super fuzzy plant. And I think there's almost this way that the energetic of mullein carries that with it, and that it kind of can make you feel really, really safe. Like in spirit doses, like one to 3 drops, it can make you feel really safe in feeling your grief. But also I think that emotional quality that Stasha's talking about, like it just kind of gives you a little bit of a buffer. But these hairs are really annoying if you get them in your throat. And so when you make tea, it's really important to strain it through like either a really fine sieve, or you can put it through a coffee strainer, because the last thing you need when you're having trouble breathing and you're making mullein tea is to feel like you inhaled a bunch of fiberglass. So the other thing that I'll say about mullein is that it's not just the leaves that are medicine. You can use the roots and the flowers too for different purposes, but the purpose that we might use the roots for is if you're having really deep lung struggles, like a little bit more of that like sharp pain, feeling like that your deep lungs are really struggling to fully open, perhaps. The mullein root as tincture or as tea can be really helpful. And the mullein root is I think in some ways nicer than or I don't know that's nicer, but it doesn't have the same kind of like preference where you really prefer the tea versus the tincture. They're pretty equivalent, the tincture and the tea, for the root. The root has lots of other properties, but and then the other action that I'll just talk about a little bit with mullein is not only is it supporting your mucociliary elevator or escalator, so that whole process of cilia waving up that Stasha talked about, it also is a nice lymphatic that has a kind of chest and lung affinity. And so at the same time, so if you imagine those alveoli with these little baskets of capillaries, there's also lymphatic action happening there. And so the mullein supports the lymph system there. And Stasha will talk a little bit more about the lymph system later, and that'll kind of tie that in for you, but just to clue you in there. Yeah. So Stasha, you want to talk about elecampane?
Sure. So next we're gonna talk about elecampane, which is Inula helenium. I put it in the chat. It's in the sunflower family or the aster family. We use the root. You can do it in a tea or a tincture, and it's a antispasmodic, sort of somewhat stimulating expectorant. Let's see. It's specific for calming irritated bronchial coughs, and it's a quote is, may be used whenever copious catarrh is present. So basically what that means is if you're choking on your cough and there's a lot of mucus, elecampane can help with that. So it has mucilage, so it has mucilage and volatile oils, so it brings stimulation and is also antimicrobial. It's pretty mild. It can be mild but profound is the way I would like to say it. It can be pretty offer relief. And You can do a cold infusion or a hot infusion, or a long decoction, and it's contraindicated if you have aster allergies, so if you're allergic to anything in the sunflower family, and in dry, hot, or irritated conditions of the lungs. So
yeah, and part of the reason for that is that elecampane is kind of a heating expectorant, so it's great if you have kind of like a cold, congested form of mucus versus like a hot, kind of dry mucus or respiratory situation. Then I might think about plantain as an expectorant, or and like either way, they're nice paired with mine. But yeah, sometimes the heating action of the elecampane isn't really what you want, and I think about that in terms of fire season, elecampane, because there's kind of this like heating, dry quality to inhaling smoke. It isn't always appropriate, or it's often not appropriate by itself. And so if you want to use elecampane, which is like such a beautiful, joy-filled herb in so many ways, it just is important to take that into account in formulation, so that the end result of your formula isn't also something that's drying and heating, because that's not going to be as supportive.
And we're going to talk about formulation a little bit at the end, so there will be some clarification on that. But in general, when you're building a formula, you want to think about some of the energetics of the plant, like whether it's heating or drying or cooling, etc. Thanks, Madeline. The next one, which we do have a slide for, is marshmallow. And that is Althea, and it's best as a suspended cold infusion. Although recently I've been filling formulas for another herbalist who uses it in tincture and uses fresh root in tincture, so I know that that also can work at this time. So usually you use the root, but you can also use the leaf and flower if you have it growing. And primarily it's a demulcent. It's very soothing to tissue inflammation. So it's really helpful for a dry, irritated cough. So you could, for instance, make a suspended cold infusion like we talked about last week, and put in your aromatic herbs, like your tincture, into that tea, and that will help buffer the effect if you don't want to have all of those constituents in your lungs. So the contraindications, this says medications with narrow therapeutic index. All that means is that sometimes the emollient and demulcency can be so great that you don't digest if the half-life of the medicine doesn't get digested, because the marshmallow can inhibit the transfer of those chemicals, I guess.
Yeah, it can like be a little bit of a buffer. Mm-hmm. One thing I've been doing with my marshmallow is I've been adding a little bit of lady's mantle to my cold infusion, or alchemia, is probably a better name for that plant. And like as a cold infusion, they come together to be almost like a peach leaf tea taste, and I'll add a little bit of salt and a little bit of maple syrup, almost like making a kind of like herbal Gatorade with some demulcent properties. And the lady's mantle is nice too, because it adds just a little bit of astringency, which sometimes is nice to balance with the mucilage, that kind of tonifying, and has nice vulnerary action, and just is making it really more palatable for me to drink a lot of cold infusion. So a little recipe, and yeah, Stasha's going to lead us on a tour of our cardiovascular systems.
I just want to say one more thing about marshmallow, which is that your suspended cold infusion can go bad. So keep it in the fridge or use it within the day. It doesn't taste good when it goes bad. I will say from personal experience, it is pretty horrible. Okay. So, so we're going to talk about the cardiovascular system in a very, very abbreviated way. So, for our purposes, the circulatory system carries oxygen and carbon dioxide from and to the lungs and around the body. So the detoxing function of the system means that all cells rely on it to keep functioning, right? So the brain and muscles use a lot of the oxygen that we take in. And so we just talked about cellular respiration and how there's gas exchange. And so sometimes if we're breathing in smoke, we're having less opportunity. If we're breathing in smoke, or if we are unable to take in an appropriate amount of oxygen per breath, we start to lose energy. If you start to lose energy from that, remember those red flags we talked about in the first class. It's important to think about those and understand what needs the attention of a medical professional. This is not a thing, like this is, this one can be really, you need to go kind of for some level of deoxygenation, right? So I did some research on hypoxia, and hypoxia essentially means the inability of your body to get oxygen. You see it in high altitudes. So studies of people in high altitudes, it's not the same as what's happening in our, sorry, what's 14,000-ish?
Oh, sorry. That is me mistyping.
Oh, okay. So basically, I was just thinking a lot about when I first designed this class like 3 years ago or something. I was thinking about how people get confused and during wildfire smoke. So there's a lot of confusion. A lot of my clients reported just feeling very muddled, difficulty thinking. They were feeling like, oh, I can't concentrate, I'm missing tasks, I'm forgetting things, my function is lower than normal, et cetera, right? So that can definitely be from our nervous system responses, definitely. But I was like, what else is going on? What else is causing this kind of inability to access our thoughts or just weird things that were happening? And so I started to hypothesize about like why maybe we're not getting the same level of oxygen that we were at one point. So let's see. So I started to think about what herbs help the oxygen carrying capacity of our blood. And so the first one that you think of, it helps with oxygen carrying capacity and also with circulation. So it makes our blood pump more efficiently, is hawthorn. And there is a slide for that, if you wouldn't mind putting it. Thank you, Madeline.
Hi. Sorry. There you go.
Okay. So hawthorn is crataegus. That's how you say that. And you can use any of the species. The one that we use mostly, I think, is Monogyna or Deglasiana, something like that. So, it's used very widely for kind of any heart weirdness or circulation weirdness. Right? No, it's not good. My dog is really wanting my attention. I apologize. And so let's see. It really helps the blood carry oxygen, and it does that by sort of strengthening the circulation. And increasing heart contractility and stabilizing the collagen. So that's over time, but in the moment, I looked up these studies on hypoxia, and basically, where did I find it? So that, I'm sorry, I lost the study, but I'll try to get that to y'all after. Are there any questions so far on Hawthorne or do you have anything to add? I mean, sorry, let me say one more thing before I open it up. So Hawthorne is good for the metaphorical and physical heart. I think we all have some things to address there in moments of system-wide upheaval. And it's just a useful thing at this time in general, but also specifically chemically to support our body pumping blood through the system. So someone had asked a question about edema earlier. So Hawthorne would be something that would help strengthen the venous return. You do need to be careful. It's one to get help around with a doctor or with an herbalist. And you should be very cautious in combining it. In fact, don't combine it with heart drugs, anything digitalin based especially. So Madeline, anything you want to say about Hawthorne?
Maybe just thinking kind of that holistic framework that you're talking about, the way that all of our body systems are more related than we think about them, because the way that our brains and learning has categorized them is like fairly reductionist to say that this is our circulatory system and this is our respiratory system. Well, like the way that those things come together and those lines blur is in our alveoli, right? Which are essentially like big capillary beds for gas exchange. And so the Hawthorne is having this respiratory system effect by supporting the health of our capillary beds in our alveoli. I just think that's cool.
Yeah, and another thing that's helpful about Hawthorne is it's a big source of bioflavonoids. The berries are very rich in bioflavonoids.
Do you use the leaf and berries interchangeably, Stasha?
No, I combine them, and the leaves and flowers are slightly different than the berries. I think it's best if you combine them equal parts, like into one tincture.
Great.
And then next we're going to talk about red root, and I don't have a slide for this, but I'll type the scientific name into the chat. It's Ceanothus, and you can use any of the species. It's a really common plant. You basically can tell the medicine is working by the depth of the hue of the red. So you're using the root bark, and it's a lymphatic and astringent, and it helps move lymph through the body. It's pretty profound from our throat, like from our throat. I think of it as a lymph that's primarily for basically our jawline to our belly button. I think that's kind of where red root shines as a lymphatic, so you can see why we've included it here. And I use it for a lot of things, but I'm just going to keep it brief and say that use it primarily as a lymphatic, and it would also help with a sore throat that is irritated from wildfire inhalation or smoke inhalation. And do you have anything to add?
I think that pretty much covers red root for me. It's not an herb I use a ton, so.
Okay.
There's a question about how to take red root. Do you have like a favorite preparation or dosage, depending on what's happening?
Yeah, I like it best as a tincture. I think it's good it's pretty astringent. So if you were to take it, it may be like in a tea, it might be pretty unpleasant. And I also think that you sort of need a larger dose of it. And so tincture is just an easier way to get that into your body. Tea works though, too. It's just, are you like, you would probably want to add honey or add it to some marshmallow or licorice or something. Does that answer the question? Okay.
There's a bunch of questions in the chat. I don't know if we want to take them or take them later, but some of them are kind of clarifying questions that maybe make sense to answer now.
Okay. So I think that a lot of these questions touch on sort of an issue with Western herbal energetics. We use a lot of words that maybe we haven't all agreed on the meaning of. And so this is sort of like, you could definitely teach like a 25 to 150 hour class on herbal energetics alone. And so some people, when they think astringent, they think drying, cooling. Those would be like the words that come to mind. And the reason being is that astringents tighten the tissue. So it's a little bit difficult to answer these questions off the cuff without like talking about every single herb. And so in the case of red root, the astringency is helping you move the lymph through the body. Some practitioners would find red root very, very drying. I have not found it to be that drying, and and that could be the species that I use. It could be the preparation. So that's sort of the answer to my question. So sometimes, or to the question. So sometimes in a hot condition, you wouldn't want to use astringents, or you would want to mediate the effect of the astringents with something demulcent. And sometimes the astringency is helpful because it furthers tightening the tissues and creates expectoration. Would be the sort of straight from my brain way to answer the question. I wonder if it's a really good question, and it touches on a lot of sort of things that different schools of Western herbalists disagree on, basically. So I don't know. Madeline might have a different answer.
I think my answer is pretty similar. Like an astringent can be warming if there are tissues that are so congested that they're causing kind of like a density, or like kind of like a cool mass where you're not getting flow through. An astringent can kind of help move some of that fluid and bring warmth back in. At the same time, like an astringent in a dry tissue state can exacerbate that. So it's not like astringents as a whole are ever warming or cooling or moistening, or like there are situations in which they're all going to act differently depending on the physiology, and also just depending on the plant and the body system. And so in the case of like red root and lymph, part of it is going to be constitutional, whether it's going to be appropriate for a given person or not. And one thing about red root is it is bitter. It has some liver action. So to speak to Colleen's question about do herbs need to be paired with red root to support after the lymph is moved, I feel like red root is supporting you through that entire process of detoxification a little bit. And maybe Stasha sees it differently. But that is kind of that piece. I think that Levi's kind of question about COVID, and Levi says Sarah Holmes mentioned that red root increases blood platelets, might be an area of concern during COVID times. I was going to point to you, Stasha, to see if you wanted to tackle that one.
My understanding of how cyanosis works with blood platelets doesn't necessarily increase it. It organizes it. So you can see it happen under a microscope. It's mostly studied around fat intake. So if you took blood from someone who's just eaten a really heavy meal, the blood flow is kind of like slow, and they kind of like bump into each other a lot, the different cells. And when you give someone cyanothus right after the meal, the blood is moving in a uniform direction, right? So it organizes them through, it's almost kind of like a magnet, and it helps them move more efficiently. So I'm unclear if it increases blood platelets. It may, but it does. I personally have found it very, very helpful in the people I've given it to, recovering from COVID, just to say that it helps move the lymph, and it helps the lungs expectorate. So I think, again, anybody's clinical and empirical experiences are valid. So those are mine, and they may be different than what other people have seen, and that could also be because of the species used, the preparation, like maybe it was in a tea, and it didn't get some of the other constituents. So that's a really good point, though. Thank you for bringing that up, Levi.
I think all these questions too are just like poking holes in the ways that Western thinking and maybe thinking in general, it isn't exactly the way that the plants work, or how they're like the only way to understand them as herbalists and people learning about plants. Like, I think all just to say that in the way that plants can kind of defy intellectualization, there's also just a big role in taking this kind of verbal intellectual knowledge that we're giving you and cycling it through your intuition and your hearts. And sometimes I think all of the like learning that I do is just a way to fact check my intuition and just be really cognizant of like, what is the relationship? I think that brings us into nervous system.
Yeah, so we kind of talked about the nervous system last time. And I'm just gonna do it's amazing how time flies when you talk about the plants, right? It's kind of wild. We have 15 minutes left, so I don't wanna take up too much time. This is a really common herb class thing, nervous system, so lots of people cover it. We kind of touched on it last time, so I'm just gonna say that, the sympathetic nervous system is fight, flight, it's activated. We'll just put it that way. There's a lot of different acronyms. Things get added to the acronyms all the time. And then there's the parasympathetic nervous system, which is kind of like our controls digestive function, heart and lungs. It supports secretions. And that's really the thing that I want to emphasize in this moment is it's going to help us with our mucilage, which we want to support. And I just also want to say that like Madeline said last time very eloquently, our sympathetic nervous system is trying to support us. It's trying to tell us to run, to get us away from smoke. Like we have a deep evolutionary need to be away from fire, large fire, right? And a kind of whatever. You get what I'm saying. And so we want to support calming down because we most of us are staying in one place rather than fleeing and listening to that kind of like evolutionary urge. So there can be kind of a feeling of stress or like you're not listening to something guttural that's happening in your body. And so we just want to support the calming effects of, we want to support with herbs our bodies need to be in more rest and digest, for lack of a better term. So there's really quick, we're gonna talk about milky oat, chamomile, and lavender in a second, but just a nervine list without going into them beyond that. That is kind of, you could do like skullcap, vervain, linden. Those are the ones that came to my mind beyond what we're about to talk about. So there are many classes on this, many articles that you can read. So we'll just, I'm going to move to Madeline talking about milky oats.
Yeah. And one other thing I'll just say about that like runaway impulse, the other impulse that I've really watched my animals have this time in response to just smelling the smoke is to like find a dark corner and fall asleep all day. And so that is also an animal body response, if that's something that you're having, of kind of like sleeping and hiding, that like crawl into a cave where the fire isn't going to go and wait it out impulse is also a possible manifestation of that that response, and maybe a little bit more of an easeful one to work with than that constant your nervous system telling you to run. Okay, so because we don't have that much time left and I want to save at least a couple minutes for questions, I'm going to go really quickly through milky oats and chamomile. And milky oats really need to be fresh, so they can either be, that means that you're going to get them in the early spring, and either as tea or you prep them then as tincture and you have them for the year. And they are a nervine that is a neurotropho-restorative. So they are actually helping rebuild and heal your nervous system. And the word that I think of when I think of milky oats in terms of nervous system effect is just nourish. So they're mineralizing, which can help. Think of our nervous system as the electrical system for the house that is our body. And they're mineralizing, which helps that electrical flow. They also are super protective and can help repair our myelin sheaths, which is like the insulation around all of our wires that are our nerves. And they are just in the face of like crispy, crunchy, too many volts running through our electrical body kind of sensation. They bring soothing and ease and calm and grounding. Grounding maybe even in the electrical sense. And so maybe this is an herb that I would dose at like 20 drops to a dropper full 3 to 5 times a day. It's one that is like so close to food that I go maybe a little bit higher than I otherwise would go. And so chamomile, I'll do 10 to 15 drops 3 times a day. I'm using the flower, whereas milky oats, I'm using the oat just as the seed is just developing. So it actually, like, if you squeeze it, the milk pops out of it. Sometimes in this area, chamomile is confused with Anthemis catula or dog fennel. It has a similar smell, but it's different. It does not have the same properties. So be sure to be able to identify. You're probably not going to find chamomile in the wild, and it's going to be the lookalike. Chamomile is like a kid-friendly herb. It is the herb that is globally sold as a tea bag more than any other plant. It is like generally regarded as safe, although it's not great if you have high stomach acid, because it can kind of stimulate your liver a little bit, which is a great reason that it is a useful support for fire season. So these nervines that also are give you a little liver support. And if you're someone with anxiety that shows up in your digestive system, chamomile as a warming herb, maybe lemon balm as a cooling herb are like 2 plants that really, really do that. So great for nervous tummies and that kind of like meeting of stress and digest. And I think that's all I'm going to say about it right now. And we'll, do you want to talk about lavender?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, lavender is Lavandula angustifolia. It's in the mint family. Y'all probably know the smell. It is a it's a carminative, so it'll help us digest, and it's a relaxing nervine and an antimicrobial. So it's kind of perfect for a lot of the things that we're working on here. But I find it really nice for inflammatory conditions. So you can interpret that widely. But basically, it's used to reduce nervous system overactivity. So another way to say that is like when the usefulness of your sympathetic nervous system has worn its welcome, like you're kind of like, okay, I get it. It's stressful. And now I can't work past that. Like I need to, like, I get it. Thank you for the message. And you need to get into the rest part. Lavender is helpful. It's not overtly sedating. It's not going to make you sleepy, but it helps you kind of relax and focus. It's also cooling. And so there's that energetic term. What I mean by that is, what do I mean by that? Is it can stop inflammation, and it can stop a heightened overthinking, frazzled, bouncing from place to place way of thinking about things, if that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. We have 5 minutes left, and I just wanted to go over, and I want to make time for questions. We did start 5 minutes late, so we can go over 5 minutes or so. I feel okay with that. I want to respect everyone's time, but I'm okay with that. I just want to go over eye washes. We kind of talked about it last time with the chamomile tea bag. Some other things that can be helpful for the eye wash is fennel or chickweed if you have it around fresh. So that's kind of actually only probably pretty useful in one specific time of the year, which would be April. Not a big wildfire time. So maybe, I don't know why I wrote that, but fennel and chamomile are really amazing for an eye wash. You can use a tea bag directly, or you can make a tea and use a washcloth on the eyes. And it's okay if you flutter your eyes slightly, although if you don't have it salinated, it will, salinated means like what saline eye wash is, so a slight amount of salt. It will it can irritate your eyes, so it can cause tears. So sometimes what you want is tears to wash it out, but sometimes you're like, okay, I need my tissue, like the surface of my eyes to be calmed. And another thing that helps with that sort of in the background at all times is bioflavonoids. They're just a specific for eye inflammation. So, think frozen blueberries or hawthorn berries, or a way that you can get some of the bioflavonoids that we talked about earlier. Okay, some other herbs that I wanted to touch on, I'm just going to say them so you can do some research, is licorice, yerba manzа, and aloe vera juice, and astragalus. And I also wanted to address a question we got last week, which is really important. So a question that people have been asking me a lot is like, is it a bad idea to open your lungs when there's wildfire smoke? Are you actually causing more damage? Are you allowing particulate matter to go farther into the recesses of your lungs? So I've thought about this question a lot since that question, and I've been getting it a lot in practice as well. And I think that sometimes I feel like when I go to herb classes or when people talk about herbs, there's like this mythical sense of like set of ideal circumstances that don't exist in real life, right? So unfortunately, because we are exposed to these chemicals, it is a sub-ideal situation. So yes, we're already mitigating harm, and we're trying to do harm reduction. And so I think that lung constriction is never a good idea. So that being said, like I could see like physiologically, I can see what people are saying when they ask that question, like, do you not want to open your lungs? But really you kind of want to keep the surface area of the lungs open so that the cilia can move and expectorate things out. So if they start to contract, things get stuck, and that's what you don't want. So my answer to this question, based on hypothesis and also just seeing what does work with clients, is yes, keep your lungs open, because breathing is important. And if your lungs are constricted, breathing will be more difficult. And getting breath, I mean, what you want is to keep the mucous membrane supple, and the cilia moving. Like you don't want anything to get caked on the lungs, or for your body's own inflammatory process to create caked on mucus or hardened mucus, right? So that's why we're staying really hydrated. We're using mucous membrane tonics. Right. So does that answer that question? Is there any like further questions about that? Or Madeline, do you have anything to add?
I guess I'll just add that it's like we need to breathe, right? And so supporting that process, it's not just supporting our lungs, it's supporting every cell in our body. It's taking strain off of our heart. And so ultimately this question comes up a lot for me with mullein, because mullein can be lung opening, especially if you're feeling a little bit of anxiety, right? And so like I just think the answer is yes. Let's utilize these plants. Maybe mullein is opening your lungs a little bit, but ultimately air has to flow all the way into the deepest parts of your lung for you to have gas exchange occur. And so that's like that has to happen, and we can mitigate that. Harm reduction is a great word for it, by also recognizing, in the case of mullein, that this mucociliary elevator that we're supporting at the same time is helping us get these particles out. And obviously the best case scenario is for us to stay inside if we have access to indoor space, so that we don't have as many particles in the air. But like Stasha said, we don't have an ideal situation. So is that clarified for everyone? And if anyone has more questions, now is the time to pop them into the chat.
And also we have an outro, which is, do you want to do that, Madeline, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if we would do that before or after questions, but
let's do it obviously.
Okay. So what I want to say is just to remember what we've said a little bit before about how this whole class is in some ways harm reduction for practices that have been negligent in the way that they have created fire, in addition to many other kinds of harm that have befallen this landscape and Native communities because of colonization. And so learning how to tend to ourselves in this wildfire process is only one piece of this puzzle. And this is a heartfelt call from me and my coworkers at Bay Heart to understand that as much as we're learning these tools for ourselves right now, we have to put in place new land management practices based on old land management practices and honor wisdom that can bring us into better relationship with fire. And it's a non-negotiable. And so my call out to all of you is how can each of you in your own way forward that practice and forward policy that creates that change. So thank you. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. So we'll hang out here for another couple minutes. And if you have questions, please pop them in, and Samwise is gonna take it away with a little bit more information about BayHeart and what we're doing to try and support the Bay Area community with plants.
There was another question from last week about masks, like if y'all have like particular mask recommendations that, yeah, also carry the overlap of protection around COVID, and your thoughts on like the masks with the vents in them. And
yeah, I'll take that question. Well, I made a post. I also translated it into Spanish that's tagged on the BayHeart Instagram and on mine, the Community Medicine Cabinet, and talking about a lot of things, including masks. And so Levi, who's in class, made a great comment, because N95s are the minimum amount of filtration really needed in smoky times. And actually, when houses are burning, if you can go all the way to a P100, that's actually better, but that's often not possible to access. And right now, with the confluence of COVID and fire season, N95s are in really short supply, and places that have been like mutual aid distro for N95s are really, at least in my county, reserving them for the unhoused community. And so how to work with that is a really great question. So N95s filter out about 3 parts per million. And because of COVID, all of the cotton masks that are being made with inserts, you can buy the 2.5 ppm filters. And so Levi was suggesting using those as opposed to an N95. They're more accessible. And so that would be my recommendation. And so I want to thank Levi for that comment, because that lit me up. Also, there are some places where you can buy kind of more expensive reusable N95s. And so as we're thinking about kind of like sustainability and the possibility of increased fires because of climate change and land tending practices, that might be something to consider investing in. But to kind of like to zoom out, I think that 2.5 ppm filter is going to be a good option. And Levi, if you have anything you want to say about that, feel free to turn on your mic and pop in, but also no pressure. Okay. So Samwise, will you lead us out?
I will. Thank you so much, Madeline and Stasha, for sharing your lessons and your wisdom and your research and your study and your practical experience. I'm just really struck with how much we need this kind of information, and also how much we need each other. Like having spent the last week displaced, it just really brought home for me like how much, like in these times, like in COVID times and smoky times, how it really is like the community that we are like connected to and enmeshed with that is there for us. And that's part of what we are building with BayHeart. The Bay Area Herbal Response Team came together as a response to the like initial COVID pandemic. And it's morphed and shifted over time around like, how can we, with our like own journeys, offer our gifts to the needs of our communities. And it's been really beautiful to see how that has morphed into like a platform that's sharing offerings like this, and the gift of the gift of our collected wisdom and experience, and also the gift of our experience through the calling clinic that we have, that is offering like short consultations for folks, and also like the sharing of our resources and of the medicines that we've made and sourced through our community networks. And all of it's really being moved and circulated through the power of this gift and this generosity. So, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about generosity and giving, and how I really want that to be the basis of the kind of like way of living and economy that I want to see come out of these collected crises, one that could actually sustain the policy changes that Madeline and Stasha and I are calling for, of like, how do we actually be in a way of being with each other that is supporting and valuing the health and livelihood of the earth and each other. So the way that we're like beginning to seed those changes and beginning to seed that way of being is by participating in systems of generosity. And I really want to acknowledge all of you for the generous gifts that you may have given or are giving by your presence and by your monetary contributions. That really helps us be able to offer these more widely to our community, because everyone's got to know about nervines. And it's really helpful to be able to support our lungs and to share this as widely as possible without a cost barrier. So I encourage you, if you feel touched by our offerings or our gift and want to contribute to helping to make those gifts go even further, and you feel inspired to do another donation to Behar, which we're also sharing with UndocuFund, which is an amazing organization supporting undocumented people who cannot get out of the smoke, then I encourage you to do that. And if your contribution is telling everyone you know to that right there, that's a mullein plant and we should collect the seeds when it comes out, then that's great too. All of it is in service of our collective health and well-being, and the way that we want to be present with each other and our communities through these times of great change and upheaval, and using them as a way to reorient towards love and justice and generosity. So in that sense, thank you again so much for your presencing and collective attention. I know I learned a lot. And thank you for being the seeds in your own community to share this wisdom. And we look forward to connecting with you in the future. Please keep an eye on our social media channels, which, if someone wants to drop that in the chat, at Behar, I forget what our handle is. But we're going to be offering a lot more of these styles of collective learnings that will probably be also very timely. And if there is something that your heart is calling for, that you want to learn more about, and you want to access and learn from the collective wisdom of many different herbalists who have studied for a long time, then let us know what you'd like to learn. We'll be happy to meet that need with our gifts. So thank you for your gift, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you. And the last thing that I want to acknowledge too is that as Behar and as a group of people with a lot of proximity to whiteness and light skin privilege, that part of our goal is to be serving communities of color and to be collaborating with organizations to make that happen. And so we're really grateful that we're able to make a big donation to UndocuFund because of this class, and that 50-50 model is something that we're hoping to continue doing. So thank you, and really take care, folks.